everyone, coming to you again, and today, since it is going to be the first Classic Movie Monday of this entire month that I'm planning to do videos, I thought it'd be best to start off with why not a Christmas classic. Now this classic in particular has been remade, Miracle on 34th Street. However, the original was made in 1947, and it stars Maureen O'Hara, John Payne, Edmund Gwenn, and Natalie Wood who was fairly young at the time. And basically why I consider Miracle on 34th Street to be a classic is that it kind of shows sort of the time period, I think, fairly well in how Christmas was like in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and how we see sort of how Christmas is becoming more of a commercial holiday. And it kind of shows sort of the feelings of Christmas during the time, and it kind of gets you into that classical type-esque atmosphere of that time period. Now, for the most part, Miracle on 34th Street addresses a fairly sort of loose plot, in that it's more about, I think, characters than it is plot. But basically the main premise is that Edmund Gwenn, who plays Kris Kringle, actually believes himself to be Kris Kringle, and to be the actual Santa Claus. And this, although makes the kids very happy, the adults are kind of concerned about this way of thinking that he has, and thinking that it's not rational or logical, and to think that that he is actually Santa Claus. So we kind of have this psychological dilemma that goes on. But for the most part, it does focus on this premise of believing, and that, it's okay to believe in things, even if they don't make rational sense. That's the sort of theme that this movie kind of plays with and kind of reinforces. But for the most part, it starts off with Kris Kringle sort of coming into New York and taking on a Macy's position as Santa Claus. And he ends up making Macy's a lot of money, and you'll kind of see how the whole commercialism type side of Christmas is addressed. And for the most part, he's doing fairly well for the company, and until a psychologist in the film thinks that Santa, or Kris Kringle, is not sane because he believes he's Santa Claus. And then therefore you have this whole trial that sort of ensues as to whether or not Kris Kringle is actually Santa Claus or not. Yes, it's kind of goofy. It is a little out there in its premise, but I think for the most part it does feel genuine. I do feel sort of the genuineness that comes out in the film, even though it is intended to be more childlike, in that sense of having a trial to determine whether or not there is actually a Santa Claus or not may seem kind of absurd to somebody who's maybe a little bit more of a rationalist here. So this is a fairly whimsical, fairly childlike Christmas classic, but it's still filled with a lot of heart. There's a lot of character to Kris Kringle. You really grow to like his character. You grow to like the little child in the film, who's played by Natalie Wood, whose name is Susan Walker. You end up liking Doris Walker, and who's her mom basically, and throughout the story, who's played by Maureen O'Hara. And basically, she's the kind of the Scrooge sort of the tale. in that she's not such a downer as Scrooge, but she just doesn't believe in Santa Claus or things like that, and believes in that she should teach her child to be rational. And then you also have John Payne, who plays this lawyer named Fred Galley, and you'll see how his character is trying to help Kris Kringle throughout this trial. And for the most part, even though a majority of the film doesn't really focus so much on the trial until sort of the very end, it does kind of get you into that holiday spirit. It's not really a plot-driven movie. If you like really plot-driven movies, this classic is probably not going to be in your taste, because it doesn't really follow so much of a plot as it does these characters. You really do grow to like them, though. I think they're fairly likable. And I think that's why this movie is probably praised so much, is because of the likability of the characters, the whole atmosphere that goes around Christmas. And I like the fact that it actually the Kris Kringle ends up working for the Macy's department store. I thought that was fairly unique and interesting, because Macy's has just been around for so long. And then this whole idea that they would bring an actual movie that focuses in on Macy's, I thought was interesting. And I liked how they addressed sort of the business side of it, because I'm a business major. So it's kind of interesting how Kris Kringle ends up impacting Macy's in such a positive way towards the beginning and middle of the entire story. But again, to talk about this plot is kind of odd, because we go from, and again, this plot is kind of all over the place. First, it's about sort of, Kris Kringle actually being the actual Santa Claus, and then there's the whole trial part of actually proving whether or not he is Santa Claus or not. So it's kind of all over the place, but for the most part, the characters that are involved are characters that are fairly likable and genuine, and they do feel like that they're actual characters that you would see in a Christmas movie. And they do have some depth to them, but not so in depth to the point where children couldn't understand it. It's intended mostly, I think, for children, but it does have its adult maturity along with it. It has concepts in it that maybe kids wouldn't be so familiar with, like, business or a courtroom trial, things like that. Kids probably wouldn't understand, but adults would more have a better understanding on. But it plays itself out, I think, in such a genuine, wholesome way that it makes you happy watching it. It's fairly whimsical, but it still has a mature side to it, and I think it's a very recommendable Christmas classic if you've not considered it. There's a lot of other Christmas classics out there that are definitely worth recommending, but I think this one is definitely should be taken into consideration, especially since a lot of people now consider maybe the remake as something that they show to kids. I definitely would recommend the first movie, the 1947 version, which I'm discussing, because I think that the original seems to have more of a clearer premise, and sort of grabs that premise, I think, really well. And I don't think really necessarily the remake is doing anything more unique than the original does. But even though it takes it takes a silly concept, it just kind of rolls with it and doesn't mind laughing at itself. So that's why I think definitely this film is why people kind of shrug off the odd parts of the plot that are in it, because the plot is kind of odd. Santa being at trial to determine whether or not he's really Santa. It's a little absurd. but it does it in such a way that it feels so genuine, and you really do feel for the characters. You do feel for Natalie Wood's character as the child, and you get behind her mother, Doris, and you get behind basically all of the characters and their perspectives. And the Santa Claus that they have, who's played by Edmund Gwenn, Kris Kringle. Well, they call him Kris Kringle technically in this movie, but for the most part, he's fairly likable, despite him having to play this character who kind of is in a world where people feel like that they don't need to believe in Santa Claus and things like that. But he plays it with such charm that it's hard not to find some likability in his character. And for the most part, it does feel like an old traditional type-ish Christmas movie. But it's full of just sweet little moments, and you do feel like a child when you watch it, while at the same time you still feel a little adult, because you know that there are certain things that they incorporate in it that could be identifiable for adults. So I think it's definitely worth recommending. I definitely would, if anybody's willing to take it into consideration, I definitely would encourage you to watch this original version of it. It's very it has a lot of heart and whimsy to it, but it does it in a way where I feel like it's productive, and it really teaches you something and tries to open your mind to the whole concept of Christmas and believing and all those kinds of things. But yeah, that's really all I think I could say about this particular film, Miracle on 34th Street. I think the reason for the title is basically because, like, you see how this one of the streets is called on 34th Street, and I believe Kris Kringle walks down on it at one point. I don't think they really try to really hammer down why it's called that, but I think it's just the title to reference something that's sort of in the film, but it's not really what the film is trying to say so much. I don't think it's really trying to make it seem like a miracle so much as it is trying to present you with concepts of that it's okay to believe, and it's okay to be a child at some points and do things that are not based for a rational reason. That's really what this film is trying to do, like a lot of Christmas movies do. And I think this one sort of maybe started a little bit the trend of that, because since it is such an old movie in 1947, it would clearly probably make sense why that would be the case, as to why a lot of people look to this film. But I think that's really all I can say. Any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. But I think that's really all I can say about this film, and I just wanted to wish everybody who celebrates Christmas a Merry Christmas Eve, and for everybody else who celebrates something different or doesn't celebrate anything at all, I wish you all the very best on this wonderful winter season, and I will see you all tomorrow on Christmas.